Hi, everyone. My name is Mischa Young. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at UC Davis in ITS in the Three Revolutions Future Mobility Program. My background, I have a PhD at the University of Toronto in urban planning. Prior to that, my background was in economics. So my research is on emerging transportation technologies and ride-hailing in particular, so Uber and Lyft, trying to figure out their impacts on cities, and especially whether they can be used or leveraged to make our cities more sustainable and equitable as well. Lately, my work has looked or has measured whether and when they behave as a substitute or supplement to transit. So doing a travel time difference analysis to understand what percentage of ride-hailing trips act as substitutes, so have a same or fairly similar travel time. Because these are trips that are particularly damaging for transit agencies as they compete with regular transit service expectations. That research also uncovered that there's a large percentage, roughly a quarter of all ride-hailing trips, that behave as complements to transit as well. So they are trips that take much, much longer by transit than they would by ride-hailing. And this uncovers the gap-filling potential that ride-hailing may play in areas that are less, that do not have the same level of supply of transit, for instance, or that do not have the same level of demand. So there's potential in these instances for ride-hailing to behave as a complement and to provide a better mobility to people in areas or at times when transit is less frequent. So more on the equity side, my work has also looked at what are the segments of the population that use ride-hailing services, and more importantly, what are the segments that are excluded from this mode. I've shown through descriptive work that there is a very high percentage, roughly 55% of ride-hailing users belong to households earning over $100,000 or more. And only 2.6% of ride-hailing users belong to households making less than $20,000. So this is all taken from a Toronto context where this work has been done. There's also a very small share of ride-hailing users who are unemployed in comparison to other modes like transit or active modes as well. Also from an equity side is looking at the other forms of ride-hailing services like Uber Wave, wheelchair accessible services, and Uber Pool, so the share services, and how these different forms of ride-hailing may serve to improve sustainable or equitable objectives that cities may have. So work that I've done looking at Uber Wave was looking at how this mode may, with the right policies in place, like for instance, minimum wait time thresholds, whether this mode may serve to improve the mobility of those requiring accessible transportation services. And our work in Toronto found that with the regulations set in place in Toronto, which are to have any ride-hailing company must provide wheelchair accessible services within the same wait time threshold within that ballpark for their regular services as well. So in Toronto, the wait time, the time in between when a passenger decides to book a ride-hailing trip and when the driver actually arrives at the pickup location, the average wait time is 11 minutes. So in order to operate in Toronto, ride-hailing companies had to provide Uber Wave services, so wheelchair accessible services within that same wait time threshold. And what we found was that they do manage to do that throughout the day. So all periods of the day, this objective or this wait time threshold is met, and in most parts of the city as well. So we've concluded that this service does improve the mobility of people with who require accessible transport services. We also looked at Uber Wave services, Uber Pool, so shared ride-hailing services. And we're trying to understand whether this mode may serve to improve or to reduce our dependence on automobiles or reduce cars in the street by increasing pooling. Ride-hailing companies often promote this service as a solution to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by sharing, and we wanted to see if that was actually happening in Toronto. So using a 12 million record data set of all ride-hailing trips since September 2016, we looked at the proportion of those trips that were conducted by Uber Pool services and we found there was only 15%. So 15% of ride-hailing services are shared ride-hailing services. And then we want to dig into that a little deeper to see what was the proportion of shared ride-hailing services or trips that were actually shared. Because a lot of the time you may book an Uber pool service, but because there's no other people looking to share a ride with you along the way, your service will go, will not be met or matched, and you will go on, basically, you will be alone the whole trip. So we wanted to see what was the proportion of Uber pool trips that were actually matched or shared. And we found that in Toronto, that's about 52%. So of the 15% that are shared, only half of them are actually successfully matched. So the benefits that shared services are having in cities is fairly limited at this point because of the small proportion of trips that are shared and the even smaller proportion that are successfully matched together. So we want to then look at the reasons why shared ride-hailing services may not be achieving the level of matching, of successful matching that they were hoping to. And we found that one of the reasons is because of the perceived longer wait time or travel time that comes with sharing. A lot of people don't want to use shared services because these services come with a longer detour time where you have to go pick up or drop off additional passengers. So we did a regression analysis to try and understand what was the time penalty associated with shared ride hailing. And we found that on average, the travel time detour, the penalty associated with sharing, was 3.6 minutes on average. So it's much shorter than what many people expect, and that the perceived detour penalty may be larger than the actual penalty. So we see that with other modes as well, like transit. There's a lot of research that has shown that the perceived wait time when you're at a bus stop and you're waiting for the bus, the perceived wait time is longer than the actual wait time. And we see the same results for shared ride hailing, where the perceived detour penalty for sharing a vehicle, picking up and dropping off other passengers is longer than the actual penalty itself. The reason why I'm interested in ride-hailing research is because these services are just under a decade old at this point. And when they first arrived, a lot of ride-hailing companies, or like these tech companies, have this model of move fast and break things. And when they arrived in cities, they would basically come and dictate their own rules. They would choose how much drivers would put on the roads, their prices, and cities were left scrambling, trying to figure out how to properly regulate these services. Cities or municipalities often tend to be more responsive than proactive with regards to new travel modes when they arrive in cities. We saw that with ride hailing. We're seeing that with e-scooters as well. And now, roughly a decade after the arrival of ride hailing, a lot of these cities are starting to want to revisit their initial regulations and are looking or are desperately needing more information about the impacts of ride hailing. So one of the main reason why I'm interested in this work is because cities are so desperately needing this new information to help them understand the impacts of ride hailing. And I hope that by providing more information on the potential impact these modes may have on transit ridership and on the impacts that their different types of ride-hailing services like Uber Pool and Uber Wave, how those may help achieve more equitable and sustainable outcomes for cities. This may help policymakers when they formulate their new policy responses to ride-hailing companies. With regards, to the long-term impacts of my study, or the overarching broader impacts of my work, I think that my work on ride hailing has showed that we desperately need more data on these services. There are many unknowns that remain with regards to ride hailing. So unknowns such as occupancy, unknowns such as costs and the price of ride hailing services, who is excluded from them, looking at surge pricing as well. We do not know when these occur or the impact these have on individual decisions whether to use this service or not. There's also the whole other side. We don't know much about the drivers. So we're starting to get more and more information about passengers, but drivers remain being a significant unknown at this point. We don't know where they come from. We don't know the deadheading that comes with them living in one area and then working in another part of the city. So all these questions and these unknowns are accentuate the need to look into these questions more and to have better data in order to answer and address these concerns. Assuming that the revenue-driven companies like ride-hailing companies, for instance, that their objectives will lead to optimal levels of supply, so of drivers within the city, is overly optimistic. And governments must preemptively take measures to ensure that the impacts of ride-hailing align much closer with societal objectives. So for instance, in terms of equity, governments have to ensure that the right amount of Uber Way vehicles are within cities to provide a better mobility for people who require this type of vehicle. They also, if we want to ensure that there is a higher rate of shared ride-hailing services within a city and that there is a higher rate of success for matched vehicles, governments should look at whether to subsidize this form of travel. We could also provide an additional tax or fee on rides that are conducted alone. The revenue from that fee could be reinjected to improve or to increase the likelihood that shared trips will be matched. Providing a subsidy, for instance, would be a great idea. So I'll end there.